Hello everyone. Today, we're going to be exploring the new Odyssey DLC for Rimworld, which allows you to build a grav ship and fly to space. This alone gave me a fantastic idea, to play as a band of nomadic raiders whose mission is to tear down society, raid ancient facilities, and do my very best to not die like a little bitch. However, this journey was made significantly harder because we'll be chased by a horde of mechanoids, and the only way to stop them is by completing a handful of quests, expanding the ship, and then, the brain. Anyway, with that all said, let's get into it. Starting the game, we were greeted with some text. To sum up our situation, we had stumbled across what we thought was an abandoned platform. It, however, was not an abandoned platform, but a mechanoid relay, and we had just awoken it. With that said, I had a short period of time to salvage the valuable grav plates before they arrived. While I was looting and smashing up their gaff, I came up with a brilliant idea. To just stay. I know it says a massive mechanoid force will be sent to kill us, but how bad could it be? Okay, I don't think we can take him. Holy crap. As I desperately tried to leave, the horde of ciphers broke down the doors to my ship, downed my 3 colonists, and blew up our fuel tanks. Yeah, this wasn't gonna work. So I admit defeat, reloaded the game, and fled the platform. We arrived at a glow forest, a new biome engulfed in a thick cloud of sulfur which cast the region into permanent darkness. Upon landing, 2 of my colonists immediately left the ship to de-stress. One rolled around in the muddy toxic water, while the other munched down on some hallucinogenic fungus. With everyone feeling a little less stressed and Thompson believing he was the entire universe, we got to work expanding our ship and naming it the Chaos Galleon. After a couple of days, we had transformed the ship from this to this. With a dining room, a generator room, and a bedroom, it wasn't the most impressive vessel right now, but if you don't like it, then I slightly dislike you. While we waited for the engines to cool down, I sent the crew out to pick as many mushrooms as possible, before receiving our first subquest, an ancient stockpile which contained a grav core and some grav panels. When expanding your ship, you use grav panels as the foundation, while grav cores are used to expand the build radius. For now, our ship could only travel a small distance and we couldn't reach it. So I picked some random tile in the mountains, took a minute to take in how beautiful this biome really is, and left. Arriving at our next location, I immediately got to work harvesting the local resources, beginning the long and painful task of researching the battery and purchasing some human life. In exchange for 100 of our mushrooms, I purchased Seedling, a delicate lady who had pretty decent stats and 0 intelligence. Aside from that, we waited for our engines to cool down and then flew away before the mechanoids found us. I picked a tile which had both ruins and a junkyard, and little did I know how terrible of an idea this was. Having a quick survey of the location, there were 3 massive complexes we could search. So upon landing, I put the stupid slave to work digging rocks and sent the gang into the first building, where we were met by some bugs. After a quick scrap with the mega spider, where everyone managed to keep their limbs intact, I continued searching until we found a stash of Luciferium. Ooh, a rare and powerful drug that gives the user a whole load of buffs, alongside the ability to permanently heal injuries. The only downside being that if you run out, you die. So for now, it's probably best we just store that away and pray we don't have to use it in the future. Anyway, I continued searching the ruins with Cole until she ran into a room full of wasps, non-lethal drones that periodically stun their victim. Cole being alone, she didn't really stand a chance and was overwhelmed. After scooping her up and tending to her wounds, she had a mental break and destroyed what remained of my small stockpile of mushrooms. Thanks, Cole. You whore. Once she had mentally recovered, I returned to grab the breaching hammer, but before calling it a day, I decided to search this small shed. This is where everything went wrong. Upon opening the door, we were greeted by a scorcher who proceeded to set all my colonists on fire. In a state of panic, I tried to flee, only to find that the combined movement debuff of the vac suit and my colonists' injuries meant the scorcher could easily catch up and knock Cole down. With Cole burning, my only choice was to fight. Scoring a few good shots, we were able to get it down to around 20% health. However, before we could land the final shot, it once again set my colonists ablaze. Watching my colonists run around on fire, my soul slowly left my body as Bowman was knocked down. With Bowman and Cole burning, It all came down to Thompson, who managed to land the final blow. Oh my god, okay, finally. Rescue everyone before they burn to death. As they both burn and Thompson spouted a load of insane jargon, it was all down to the slave to rescue the two colonists and do her best to heal them. With her zero medical skill. With everyone covered in burns and our only doctor mentally challenged, it was inevitable that the infections would begin to fester. Bowman developed 4, while Cole only had 2. Thompson, on the other hand, rolled just 1 infection. With my 3 colonists on the verge of death, it was safe to assume that not everyone was going to survive. In fact, in my mind, I had already written off both Bowman and Cole. Thompson, on the other hand, could still be saved. Now, I'm not entirely sure it helped, but out of desperation to save this run, I had Thompson sign a deal with the devil and take some Luciferium. Shortly after, the inevitable happened, and before I could even have a second to mourn their passing, Randy sent a raid at me. A single raider who ran in and stole one of my engines. He just stole my thruster! What? He's gonna get away. He's actually going to get away with my thruster because Thompson can't hit anything. That is unbelievable. Unbelievable. But hey, on a positive note, Thompson and Seeding became lovers, which is nice. Anyway, after rebuilding the engine, I couldn't stomach being here any longer. So with just half the crew left, we once again picked a random tile and left. Arriving at the new location, the first thing I tried to do was recruit Seedling, only to find that Thompson's new lover was unwavering. Are you kidding me? This bitch is unwavering? Thanks, Ember. Then, just to top it off, the following day they decided to get married. If that's what they really want, is to be together forever, even though she's a slave and refuses to be a proper member of the colony, even though it's only her and her lover, fine, I guess. Moving on, I got a quest to take in a deserter from the Empire. Normally, I would ignore this quest, but since she was being chased by a single trooper, and I had just been raided, I accepted. She rocked up with some pretty reasonable stats and was armed with a Hellcat rifle. An assault rifle with an underbarreled flamethrower, which proved very effective at dealing with the drugged up trooper. Get toasted, you little bitch. Aside from that, our time at what I dubbed as the grasslands came to an end, as it was time to head to the ancient stockpile and get our first grav core. Landing in the desert, we were met with 3 separate stockpiles, which required 4 intelligence to hack, which meant it came down to Nikki with her 4 intelligence. As you can imagine, this process sucked. Okay, then she managed to get herself locked out of all 3 entrances. Until finally, what felt like forever, we broke into the first stockpile. Inside, we were met with a surprise. Hello? Hunter drone. Okay, now that's not good. And with that, the expedition was over. After patching her up, I sent Thompson to loot the crate inside the room, where we found a legendary LMG. Titled Revenge's LMG, this unique weapon came with the trait hollow point rounds, giving it an additional 20% damage multiplier. The rest of the stockpile didn't have much to offer, just a couple of pallets of survival meals and some bugs. The second stockpile didn't have much to offer either, aside from a few more hunter drones to dodge. What the fighting? Oh! And the slave having a little rebellion. Once we had calmed her down, I started to realize that maybe leaving her up there by herself wasn't the best of ideas. Anyway, exploring the next stockpile, we found our grav core. Got hit by another hunter drone. Nikki, run! Run, Nikki, run! Oh, and the slave's escaping. And then Seedling ran off. Seedling's escape was a blow to the colony, but it wasn't the end of the world. At least I had my shiny new grav core, which I could use to expand the ship. Placing it in the rear so I could expand Thompson's bedroom, it was all I could do before I had to make my escape, as the mechs had found our location and would be arriving shortly. Here we go. Fly away! Since I seemed incapable of holding on to human life, I came up with a brilliant idea. Robots. Instead of having to deal with fickle human beings, I could instead have an army of robots. So with that said, our next destination was a nearby complex, which housed a dead Mechanitor. Once we arrived, we cracked open the cryosleeper, ripped the mech link from his brain, and inserted it into ourselves. With the ability to control our own mechs, we were kindly gifted a single lifter. If I wanted more, I was going to have to do some research. But with a combined research of 5 at a 40% rate, because I didn't realize research benches had to be built in a proper laboratory now, this took forever. Anyway, once I had amended that skill issue and finally finished researching, it was time to start producing my own small army. Starting with a couple of Militaurs for protection, an Agrahat to help us with fuel production, and a cleaning bot to do some sucking. With my robot army built, it was time to resolve a little issue that had been brewing in the background. Our dwindling stockpile of Luciferium. To find some Luciferium, I was going to have to explore some more ancient complexes, and annoyingly, we were just out of reach of one. Landing next to the location, I sent Thompson out to explore the ruins, leaving Nikki alone to defend the ship. Because surely, what were the odds of a raid happening while Thompson was away? Arriving in the middle of a foggy night armed with melee weapons, the raiders closed in on Nikki as I tried to pull her back to the ship. With access to my stockpile, they tried to steal what they could, one of those items being my fucking grav engine. They're just stealing my shit! Hey! And they just stole my... With their hands full of my valuable loot, Nikki stood in the doorway and punched them to death. With one dead and the other knocked down, I let the third one escape with a handful of uranium. And you're probably thinking to yourself, but it's all okay, because I bet Rarr found some Luciferium at the ancient complex. No, I did not. But hey, new slave, who this? Anyway, as soon as the engines had cooled down, I headed towards another ancient complex, where I can promise you 100% I did not cheat this in. 13 Luciferium! I'm happy. I'm very happy. Take that. Take that. Yep. Thank you very much. Good stuff. Oh, yeah. With my desperate search for Lucy over, it was time to head to the mechanoid relay next to us and grab ourselves our second grav core. Arriving at the mech relay, it was definitely one of the more interesting maps. Having a quick look around, there were 3 stabilizers which we would have to destroy before the relay would give us our grav core. After clearing out the defending mechs, we could either quietly hack them with our 4 intelligence or destroy them. Destroying them, however, cools down a wave of reinforcements, but I'll be honest, it wasn't anything we couldn't handle. With the stabilizers destroyed, the relay was now vulnerable and smashed into the ground. Securing the grav core, I spent the next few days searching the ruins, strategically using the Militaurs as bait for the hunter drones. Sorry, Militor. Oh, he survived! And pulling old women out of sleepers so I could steal their armor. Following this, I dealt with a defoiler ship that randomly crashed next to us, before doing a little more ship expansion. Mainly building some turrets around the outside, as it was finally time to do some raiding. Our target was a nearby tribal village. Landing directly on top of their base, we opened fire on the crowd of poorly equipped tribals. Their wooden clubs were no match for our machine guns, but I did get a little nervous when a large band of reinforcements arrived. With another 20 or so tribals to kill, I got a little nervous until they funneled through the village and directly into our kill zone. And once again, the poor bastards didn't stand a chance. With all the tribals dead and the 600 chocolate bars now in my possession, we were once again in the awkward situation of just kind of waiting around. During this time, we were offered a quest to take in Dweeb, a 7-year-old child who apparently wants to set fire to a massive garbage pile to kill a gang of cannibals. The only problem being that it would cause a volcanic winter for 12 days, which, let's be honest, isn't really going to be a problem since we'll be leaving anyway. So, accepting the child into our crew, he arrived with a massive 10 intelligence, which was more than all my other crew combined. But being only 7 years old, we couldn't chuck him straight on the research bench. So, it was straight into the growth vat. While I waited around, I thought it'd be a good idea to provoke the Diabolus into attacking us. It followed the same path as the tribals, opting to run through the small village and directly into my turrets. After a brief and relatively easy fight, I recovered the signal chip, which will allow me to begin researching the next tier of mech tech, allowing us to research things like lancers and ciphers, but more importantly, the tunneler, a huge mining bomb with a built-in shield belt and smoke bombs. But we needed some plasteel before we could build one. Moving on, there was an asteroid floating above us, and I saw this as the perfect opportunity to explore space, while also mining some silver. Once we arrived, I sent the boys out to mine what turned out to be a very tiny amount of silver, and then got raided by the Orbital Dragons. Yeah, they didn't stand a chance. Feeling a little upset by their raid, I got my revenge by exposing the survivors to the vacuum. With that said, my taste for violence had not been quenched, and I wanted more. So, landing at another tribal settlement, I sent the crew out and began to... Yeah, that's not good. With Nikki and Kate downed, all my Militaurs either dead or offline, it came down to Thompson, who managed to just about scrape a victory with his LMG. Okay, we just about scraped out a win. This raid had taught me one thing. We needed more firepower. But crafting new weapons would have to come later, as a band of heavily armed raiders arrived from the nearby Waster faction. Armed with a combination of shotguns, heavy SMGs, grenades, and this guy who had a minigun, we barely managed to survive, as once again it came down to Thompson and his LMG. Good job, Thompson. With another successful raid under our belt, it was time to explore another set of ruins. But they're not important because all we found were some bugs that wanted to kill us. What was important was the quest we got shortly after. What? A quest for 60 Luciferium? All I had to do was look after 6 paralyzed prisoners for 19 days and maybe get raided a little bit. Now, around this point, our stockpile of Luciferium was starting to run out, but with this quest, we would be stocked up for the rest of the game. So of course, I accepted the quest, let the paralyzed prisoners flop around in the freezing cold toxic fallout before chucking them down in the storeroom. This is where things went a little wrong. I didn't notice that 2 of the prisoners had suddenly just gotten over their paralysis, meaning they were now wandering around in the storeroom filled with basic resources, advanced components, and grenades. Within seconds, they tried to escape by picking up the grenades and running over to my very large, very full fuel tanks. Stop him! Oh! It didn't blow up! It didn't blow up! After the rebellion, I toyed with the idea of removing their legs, as the quest technically states they don't have to be returned in full. Instead, I just opted to move those 2 into their own little cell, and then headed to our next destination, a frozen terraformer which had another grav core. Arriving at the frozen terraformer, it became very obvious to me that this location was pretty cold. Once we had carved out a path to the facility, we found the usual suspects inside: wasps, sentry bots, and hunter drones. After making some good progress, I had to pull the colonists back to heal up. During this brief piece of respite, I gave birth to a tunneler. The tunneler is meant to be a humble mining drone, spending its days digging rocks for its creator. This one, however, was going to be my bitch. I planned on using it as a punching bag for all the crap you can find in these facilities. And you know what? It did a fantastic job, aside from when it ran into some wasps. Anyway, we grabbed the grav core from the terraformer and prepared for our next stop. Another mechanoid base, which took me ages to grind through because every room was filled with mech vats. Not all of them were full, but every time I stepped into a room and heard, I would shit myself. Room by room, we slowly grinded through the mechanoids until I finally reached the ancient grav engine and ripped out the core. Before leaving this place, I sent the prisoners home, giving us our 60 Luciferium, and with that, it was time to depart to a more peaceful location. I'd spent the last few days either raiding or securing grav cores, and I just wanted a few days to relax and replenish our supplies. Arriving at this beautiful location, I sent the crew out to plant some rice and exploit the local resources. During this time, I dumped the pollution that my bots were producing in the mud just below the ship. This had been my usual policy, but this time, a horde of bugs appeared. Trapped for the moment, we were safe as long as no one woke them up. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? Why? Immediately, they began chasing my colonists, who all rushed into the safety of the ship. As I desperately tried to escape, the bugs began attacking my turrets, because of course they did, and I had to make a hasty retreat. I escaped to a pretty cool map, and would have seriously considered settling the place if I wasn't playing as a nomad. Once I landed, I sent the bots and slaves out to dig rocks, set up a dumping zone right next to the ship because I refused to learn from my mistakes, and did some fishing, which was nice. However, a few days into our, let's call it a holiday, I received a quest titled Zubo's Many Friends. Zubo, being a 19-year-old musical kid, had disrupted a peace ritual between 2 factions, and was now being chased by both of them. Accepting the quest then, I watched as utter chaos unfolded as the 2 factions arrived on top of each other. One side armed with heavy weapons, the other with gas. And to top it off, in between them was a pack of boomalopes. Unfortunately for the wasters, the combination of triple rocket launchers and boomalopes absolutely annihilated them. They did, however, manage to gas the entire pocket, meaning all I had to deal with was a few stragglers and an alpaca. After killing 3 different groups of raiders, the rest of our time was generally pretty chill. Once I was happy with my exploitation of the region, I left to test out my new autocannons on a group of tribals. They proved incredibly effective on the local population, and then the reinforcements that arrived the next day. With another settlement down and my confidence at an all-time high, I felt it was time to grind through the final grav cores, starting with heading to a mechanoid platform. Once we arrived, I sent out the crew to clear the complex. After grinding through all the rooms, we arrived at the grav core's location. Filled with a handful of mechs, I pulled the crew back to a small room where we baited them down the narrow corridor and fought them one by one. Now I know this isn't the most heroic strategy, but it worked. Once my crew had bravely defeated it in single combat, we harvested the core and made our way towards the next one. Arriving at the next location, the core was located in a cave infested with bugs. So I put together an excavation crew and let the tunnelers chew their way through the insect's home until we found it, alongside a hive queen, which could be tamed. I instead opted for plan B, which was to fill the bitch with as many bullets as possible. With the queen dead and the second core secured, the final one was located in an ancient reactor, where I just kinda walked in and took it. With the core in our possession, we'd finally figured out the location of the mechive and had the opportunity to destroy the threat once and for all. However, I needed some better gear. The following days were spent raiding villages, stripping entire maps for resources, using our long-range scanner to find plasteel, killing mech clusters, making charge rifles, making vac suits, and finally, slapping on as many uranium turrets onto the ship as possible. Arriving at the platform, my slug turrets began shooting all the small clusters of mechs. Once they had been dealt with, I wasted no time dosing the crew up on yayo and sending them out to explore the northern section of the platform. We were looking for the 3 stabilizers that were making the mech brain in the center of the platform invulnerable. Also surrounding the brain were 4 factories pumping out fresh mechs every 12 hours. Once enough mechs had been created, they would assault the ship. With that said, you can imagine my disappointment when we found nothing. The next morning, I once again dosed the crew up on yayo and explored the south. Packing the outside door, I was greeted by the first stabilizer. Guarded by a handful of mechs, I could lie and pretend what followed was a nail-biting battle, but in reality, I stood in the doorway, which didn't aggro the mechs for some reason, and just shot it. Once it was destroyed, a horde of reinforcements arrived, but they were no match for my slug turrets. That evening though, the mechs launched their first assault against the ship, where one of the crew took multiple laser beams to the face. I tried to save him by rushing him to the hospital, but unfortunately the combination of multiple burns, permanent brain damage, and yayo was too much for his body to handle. Oh, he did actually die. Cause high on yayo? It was the yayo that killed him? With our first casualty, we couldn't afford to fall back, so the following day we sniffed out the second stabilizer. Unfortunately for the poor tunneler that opened the door, he got absolutely annihilated. I pulled the crew back and baited the mechanoids through the narrow corridor and killed them one by one. After, we destroyed the stabilizer and were hit by another wave of reinforcements. With another one of my crew dying, time was running out and we had to find the last stabilizer, which ended up being right here. It was guarded by a fuck ton of mechs, so again, I used the massive brain tactic of fighting in a tight corridor. Upon its destruction, the brain was now vulnerable. I pulled the crew back to the ship, where my plan was to wait for the assault from the brain before pushing in. However, it never came. In fact, I waited so long, Katie gave birth. Anyway, once she had given birth and the baby was placed in the responsible arms of a growth vat, it was time to attack the brain. So, I launched my attack on the hive, used the tunneler to tank everything, touched the brain, was given the choice between shutting down the mechs worldwide or utilizing the power for myself, which obviously I took the call for myself, left the platform, dropped some mechs on some poor tribals, and then came to the conclusion I was done here. Anyway, with that said, I'd like to thank you all for watching. Big thank you to my Patreons and channel members who throw money at me, and thank you for liking this video. And as always, new videos every week.